Kia ora tato, welcome back. And this is our last session of the day. In many ways, a lot of what's been going on today has had this big focus and leading us to this point of the flagship actions which have already been identified for the Auckland Climate Action Plan. And so we have a person involved with each of the five actions. I won't describe them now, I'll leave it to them to describe, but I will introduce David Hall, who's immediately here on my second right from AUT, and Rhys Jones from the University of Auckland, who are going to then introduce the representatives of the five flagship actions, and so you hear about them and the process they're going through. So a very warm welcome to this 7-strong or 8-strong panel. The panel, a big hand please, thanks.
Kia ora tātou, tēnā koe Rod, me ngā mihi nunu I kia koutou katoa, ko whakapūnake te maunga, ko Wairo te awa, ko Ngāti Kahungunu te iwi, ko Rhys Jones tōku ingoa, no reira, huri no te whare tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, and I'm just going to pass over to David so he can introduce himself as well. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora tātou, yeah, I'm David Hall. I'm also on the independent advisory group for the Climate Action Plan. And for the purposes of briskness, we have only got a short amount of time, so I'm just going to introduce Marie-Eve Bacon from Vector, who is going to talk to us about the Decentralized Energy Flagship. So Marie-Eve, could you just describe for everybody what is the flagship action and what are some of the impacts which it is intended to deliver?
You. Okay, so the flagship actions, I believe there's 5 of them. So this one related to energy. The decentralization of energy, in essence, is basically looking at different source of energy outside of the normal generation that we are familiar with, which is water, geothermal, mostly, and gas here in New Zealand. So we are looking at implementing and looking at the ways we could accelerate the decentralization of energy in homes, meaning that homes could be using solar and battery combination, for example, for their own purpose, and potentially even EV as the battery for home consumption. So the idea there is, how could we, our project is specifically centered around the acceleration of that, so therefore we have the opportunity to with one of the representatives in our team from HLC, to look at the development in Mangere of 10,000 homes that will be built over the next 10 years, and see how we can, in this process, embed the decentralization of energy, so the use of renewable sources, as part of a normal process. Because if you leave those homes alone right now and let them build the way they are planned to be built, I can guarantee you there will be no or very little energy renewable to be used on those homes. So the project is a theoretical project, and for the sole purpose of not creating any issues in the industry in terms of collusions or any other aspects around that. So because we are together as a team to collaborate together, we are not selected as the participant to roll out those resource or energy resources. We are there to look at the process and look at the barrier and raise those issues in this, through this forum, and being able to hopefully create a process that will make this smoother for those home built. And I would like to add, not to take too much time, but it is a very interesting project and full of challenges as well. We would like to, hopefully this will serve as building a business case for the builders to be able to embed that in their process as well. So it is a very important piece of work, and we're looking forward to hopefully share with you in a few months once we have some outcomes.
And can I just ask another question? One of the key factors for getting change and for introducing these sorts of projects is some of the co-benefits which are also aligned with these. I mean, this is the climate action plan, but in order to get progress, we need to often show a wider suite of benefits in the social environmental domain. So I'm just wondering if maybe you could enlighten us on some of those wider integrated benefits.
Sure. So just for everyone's benefit, the decentralization of energy is very important, not just for, as you say, for the CO2 emission and removing the dependency on the current generation, which, arguably we are using a lot of water to generate our energy, but as someone said earlier this morning, we have also coal plants, and the peaking plants also are using gas, which is not good, particularly in the North Island. So it is good for the country and it's good for the CO2 emission, but the decentralization of energy also gives a lot of choices for consumer, or better choices for consumers. So that is giving the ability for consumer to choose how they want to use their energy in their home. They could be, less. The idea is they would be less reliant on the grid, but also have their own ways and their own means to generate their own power, and therefore they can control their bill, in a different way, and hopefully to have some cost saving with that. It is also good for industry, for businesses, because it creates more competition. It provides more as it provides more choices. It provides more opportunity for businesses to put a new business model out there. So good for the country, good for businesses, and it's good for the network also. So I'm not here on behalf of Vector, even though I vote for Vector, but in terms of a network perspective, it is very good for resilience. So the more we are using a shared resilience, meaning that you all contribute to the network and generation, we are reducing the peak in the network, and therefore we are designing a network that is balanced for the future, that is designed not for our grandchildren to pay for our asset that we're putting in today. We want to design it for them so that it has less reliance on this massive investment that we are making today, because we don't have second or third generation to help the network. Don't know if that adds up.
Ngā mihi nui.
Kia ora, thank you. We are moving fairly quickly through because we've got limited time this afternoon, but I would like to introduce Tim Fitzpatrick from Auckland Council. Tim's representing the City Centre Flagship. So just a couple of questions for you, Tim, really. First, if you can just really describe, the action that is being progressed through this flagship and why that topic's been identified as a flagship action. What are some of the benefits in terms of climate mitigation or resilience?
Kia ora tātou. Yes, thank you. So the flagship action is aligned to really trying to identify something that's both tangible and achievable within a given period, but also significant and transformational. So the alignment of this flagship coincides with the refresh and updating of the City Centre Master Plan, the 2020 edition, and to part of that will bring in both the Wynyard Quarters and the Waterfront Plan and the Ports Plan into a single climate action plan, if you like, for the city centre. When we look at this, there'll be a number of areas that we cover, and in the master plan, which will include, energy contribution to greenhouse gases. It'll include green star buildings, waste operations, construction waste cycle. But a lot of those things are actually already covered by other flagship actions or by works that are underway. So those will, whilst they'll be part of the action plan for the City Centre Master Plan, the area of this specific design sprint that we want to coordinate and give momentum is around transport emissions and emissions from transportation. So an ambitious plan to link our the access strategy for the whole city, a restructuring of that whole city that at the heart of it has a zero emissions area, and that aligns with our mayor's fossil fuel-free streets declaration to achieve that. Brings in then the opportunity to coordinate that sits as a tangible project at the heart of bringing in things that the ports are looking at, which are alternative energy, supply pilots, supply chains for freight, shore power, cruise for both cruise and containers. Also, it looks at a perspective that the Wynyard Quarter specifically looking at, which is zero emissions through behaviour change and transport design management. So that's their Transport Management Association that they have for that. It's coordinating what we've identified as a need for a coordinated research and evidence-based program for that. Works again also and ties into our clean air research and direction, which is we're working title Best Air Quality in the World for a million plus city. So bringing together those actions into a definable and tangible program. The co-benefits, I think, are inherent because we understand the benefits of this for both health for a healthy environment, clean air. We have our worst air pollution where we have our highest density populations, so it's an obvious target point. But equally for the leverage that it provides into industry by for cleaner emissions or zero emissions vehicles. So we start to provide that leverage and control into it. The benefits of the access program itself I won't go into unless you ask, because there are multiple and you won't stop me. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Tim.
And now I'll introduce Miranda James from Panuku, who's going to talk to us about green-blue networks. So Miranda, if you could maybe explain to us what the green-blue networks are and the impacts, and especially again those integrated impacts, climate change, but also all these other aspects that this was going to interact with.
Kia ora tātou, I'm Miranda James from Panuku Development, Auckland. I'm involved with the Blue-Green Network Flagship action, and we've been focusing in particular on Manukau. The great thing about looking at blue-green networks is that it's become apparent really quickly just the multitude of co-benefits, and I think that just the Todd Gartner's talk earlier when he talked about the joint benefits analysis and the way that they're quantifying and starting to understand the value in the multiple outcomes and multiple benefits that you get from green infrastructure. I think that talks to how complex these systems are and how wide-ranging the benefits are. So we have crafted a goal statement, which is to value and integrate blue-green networks in the regeneration of Manukau, to enhance the Māori of Manukau. And I think the other thing that's been highlighted repeatedly throughout the day is how important Te Ao Māori is, and how this conversation is very much aligned with Māori values and the cultural integrity of what we're doing. And that's been so apparent with all the conversations we've had around blue-green networks that you just cannot separate out those values. It's just absolutely integral. So in terms of climate, there's a lot of climate resilience benefits to blue-green networks. And I should note too that we're using the word network specifically rather than infrastructure, because it's, we're talking about canopy cover as well as waterways. Like the definition of what a blue-green network is actually very wide and very broad. And we've had the benefit of having a little bit of a living lab to look at in Manukau, which is the Pahunui Regeneration Project, which my colleague Zara Short is starting to initiate. And has in fact just got a joint business case signed off to progress that work, which is awesome. Benefits, climate resilience, climate sequestration. We talked about that today and how important sequestration is in terms of if we're going to head for a zero emissions future, that's got to be part of the story. The social benefits, the health benefits, it's almost impossible to quantify. And I think the other thing is the complexity, of course, when you're talking about water, because water doesn't know the same geographical or political boundaries that we do. And for example, the Puanui is one example where, the whole area of the Puanui catchment, if you take it from the mountains to the Manukau Harbour, that's 10 kilometres. And along that way, it passes through every single land use you can imagine. There's industrial, there's private development, there's GHB land, there's council-owned land, there's residential, there's commercial, multiple landowners and stakeholders. So engaging and understanding what kind of levers we need to pull to get change and to be prioritising and enhancing these networks, it's a complex question. I'd just like to have a shout out to the Flagship team, because it's been really great working genuinely cross-council with people with multiple disciplines. We work in silos, and it's been a great privilege to hear all the expertise that we've got around council. And so there's been a group of us from parks, from biodiversity, myself and my colleagues from Panuku, some iwi representation, TSI, bringing in the private sector, which has been really great. We had a little field trip out to the Puanui, which was awesome. It was great to be able to go out into the field and talk about a real life situation. And we've identified 11 sub-actions which are going to be prioritised over the next couple of days. And the aim is to come up with a really detailed action plan about how we can understand and start to value and prioritise these types of assets. One of the things that really came out in our conversations, I think, was something which Lucy said, where she said, you've got to daylight mines before you can daylight streams. And one of the big issues that we've got is how you start to value natural assets when a lot of them are underground, under concrete, you can't see them, you can't interact with them, you don't know they're there. So how do you know what benefit they can possibly bring if there's no way of quantifying or understanding that? So one of the big questions for us is about value. How do we start valuing these? How do we start telling the story about the value, the multiple values that they can bring? And that'll be one of the focuses that we've got over the next couple of days. Cool.
Kia ora, thank you, Miranda. Next, I'd like to introduce Matt Montgomery from Auckland Council, who's here with the Climate Innovation Flagship. Matt, if you could just tell us about what that involves and what the likely benefits are, and including, as we've been doing, the sort of wider benefits beyond just the emissions reduction and other climate benefits.
Absolutely, and kia ora everyone. I've been looking at climate innovation ecosystem, which largely seeks to address the acceleration of the adoption of climate change technologies and innovation that could deliver multiple benefits across all the things already mentioned. But the problem statement that we're trying to address is that globally you look at best practice, you look at the quadruple helix model, which is government, industry, academia and communities working collectively together on something. But locally we don't have that model in place at the moment formally. And if you look at some of the R&D and innovation spend within the companies locally, it's not at the same global level that other areas are too. So the problem that we're trying to address is how can we formulate that group of people? How can we inspire and engage that group to make sure that our companies, our residents and people are thinking and innovating towards climate change and are spending towards that too. That doesn't mean that this is voluntary. That doesn't mean that this is everybody doing this out of their own good. This is actually a group of people that need to come together to centralise one voice around some of the priorities that need to be addressed here, but also to look to national funds, philanthropic organisations, to then create a sustainable funding mechanism for those innovations to proceed. And part of that goes to us understanding what we can already adopt and use now that can deliver benefits, but also what can we develop that has local meaning and relevance and is a local opportunity for individuals, companies and communities here that we can start getting on with developing and testing and delivering. So currently the group is made up of that range of quadruple actors. So we've got industry and academia working quite closely together on this already. We've got some community representatives and a good broad expertise from government as well. The key next stages will be trying to work out what's the operating model that will enable this to be sustainable and successful.
Okay, and is that the sort of problem or issue that you're going to be working on over the next few days?
That's right, yeah. So there's a lot of good intent, there's a lot of good best practice that we know globally, but what does that local context really mean? How can we really make that work here is what we'll come to the conclusion of by tomorrow evening, I believe, no, Wednesday evening.
Well, good luck with that. Kia ora, thank you.
And finally, I'll introduce Mark Roberts from Auckland Council, and he's going to be talking about circular construction and demolition. And so Mark, can you enlighten us on this flagship action and some of the impacts that you expect to deliver by implementing it in time?
Kia ora tātou. My name is Mark Roberts. Mark Roberts. I work in the waste planning team, Auckland Council, and we are looking at actions that can turn Auckland's construction and demolition waste into a more circular kind of model. If any of you have done a bit of home renovation, I'm sure you won't be surprised to know that there's about 500,000 tonnes, nearly 600,000 tonnes of construction and demolition waste goes to landfill each year. But what we do know is that there is an enormous amount of waste designed into buildings and designed into houses, and there's an enormous boom of development. And so one of the key things we're looking for is how can we design waste out of those structures. And we're not just looking at the physical side of it, the design at the time when architects and designers are planning on those structures. We're looking at the designs of the methods and the processes that are being used at the time buildings are being built, the time that developers and builders are working together on how they will put those sites together and operate them at the time. One of the areas that we've been working on in council itself is looking at our own projects, and because we know that one of the things we can't do is ask the industry to change when the council, which has an enormous estate, isn't changing itself. And one of the things that we have learned very, very quickly is that there is an enormous capacity in the community to work in this space. There's a lot of desire and need for materials, building materials that are perhaps described as waste, which are actually resources that can be put out to the community. So we need to kind of understand what those needs and desires are, how those needs and desires can be satisfied in a safe and effective and efficient way, and who are the people that are out there that are kind of looking for those materials. It's that kind of looking at the picture of construction and demolition waste from beginning to the end, and how can design work to get waste out.
Of course, the question when we talk about actions is always what are the barriers to actions, and that was immediately what leapt to my mind when you were talking there. So I'd love to hear just a little bit of a sense of some of the obstacles you expect to overcome to make these ideas a reality.
I guess the major obstacle is that the industry itself is in an enormous state of pressure. It's being asked to turn out developments on a timescale like we've probably never seen before, and probably on cost pressures that we've not seen before as well. And so ways that we can look to design out waste in ways that kind of don't feel threatening to time and cost constraints is a kind of a key one. And it's an industry which is highly aware of risk, and so we need to understand how we can do those things without increasing a sense of risk.
Kia ora. We've probably got time for maybe 2 or 3 questions, especially if we're quick. One sentence with an upward inflection is a good definition of a sentence, a question. So if anyone else has got any burning questions, please put your hand up and I can come and any more illumination about any of the flagship actions? Shall I put it to the panel of what are some of the other obstacles and barriers that you see for the actions that the various projects that you're looking to implement over time?
I can talk very quickly about the innovation flagship. I think one of the barriers there is that to get something like this up and running is actually an investment which doesn't necessarily pay off. So from a commercial perspective, it isn't something that people want to readily move into. From the perspective of the council, that we can take in that space and we can get this up and running so that it becomes a more operatable model. So we can stand into that market failure space and kick that off. The other thing is a mindset shift, which is getting away from competition and more towards collaboration. So we have this horrible conjoined phrase of it's now a collaboration. So, but it's how do you compete to be the best collaborator? And actually, what you find when you put people in that mindset that people shift very quickly to sharing, and that's what we need to produce.
Marie, Eve.
Yeah, actually, I want to pick on that as well, because just from our group, which I have fantastic teammates in that group, we quickly realized that we are pretty much all competing against each other from various businesses streams that we have. For example, solar panel installation, battery deployment, load management. We were all kind of looking at each other and say, well, I can do that, I could do this, I could do this. So we went through, the first day of work was pretty much trying to land on a project where we're not stepping on toes. And so that brought very interesting and frank conversation, and we really challenge ourselves to be able to work together. And now we have landed on a project we're all very happy with and very motivated, even though, as I said, ultimately when this project is launched in the market to open up to compete and see who will be bidding on it, we'll probably all raise our hands, plus more. But that is actually a good thing. So we're kind of past that level of we can't work together at all to, hey, let's do this for the future, for the community, and then come back to bid on it later when it's open for business. But that was the progress we did within just a few sessions. So yeah, it's very positive.
Do you have any? Oh yeah.
A question for Mark about circular construction waste. Where are the good examples worldwide of where such an approach has been taken?
So just for everybody else, that's a question of where are other international examples for where best international examples where the circular economy has been implemented well.
Well, I like to think that we're implementing some of the best. We've been working with C40s to try and understand that a little bit better and find out where the really good examples are. And we're seeing examples coming out of some obvious places like Portland, also Washington, some of the cities on the eastern border of the US. We're seeing some really exciting things and really cool ways of bringing community social enterprises into that space and getting them working with really good capacity. And also they have those examples are also using regulation as well to drive that. And we've also been looking at examples out of places like Rotterdam as well, who are also experiencing some of the regeneration projects that we're seeing too.
Thank you. We do have a question down the back.
Hi. Yep. No, these are a whole range of good projects. I was just wanting to know, are there any set targets and deadlines against them all, so we can assess in X period of time? Hey, this has worked. This hasn't worked. If this hasn't worked, what have we done? What can we do to make sure we, good work going in the future, or what needs to be done differently, so we can actually learn from these experiences as well?
Who would like to kick this one off? Do you want to each briefly say what your targets are and how we'll know if you've been successful?
I'm going to dodge that one and say no, that's the purpose of tomorrow and Wednesday. But no, I take your point fully, that actually we do need to be able to hold ourselves to account for these things and to be a bit more reflective of the performance itself. I think part of that is recognising that we're acting in a complex system, and that putting hard and fast targets on things has to be a little bit more appropriate based on the activity that needs to be undertaken. So it might be more around process and outcome targets rather than outputs, and knowing that it's a learning process and that we'll have to keep reflecting on our progress towards it.
Just another question here.
In Auckland? Oh, okay. A really easy one is the community recycling centres that have been set up around Auckland. There's about half a dozen at the moment, and there should be about half a dozen more coming in the next few years. And so those are social enterprises that work across the waste space, but are increasingly building their capacity into construction and demolition waste. And there's a myriad of other social businesses, social enterprises like All Heart, Trail Group, and people who who are working to build the capacity in that space. Yeah.
And civil share as well.
Civil share is another one. Yeah.
Okay, we just have another question over this side.
Kia ora. This one's for Miranda. I'd like to hear a bit more in terms of, I guess, your kōrero around how Te Ao Māori has shaped, I guess, some of the work that you're doing, because it'd be great to see how that understanding of values, how that's given a lot more weight and how that manifests and transforms community compared to the usual processes that we would undertake. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I'm going to defer to my colleague Sarah Short, who's leading the Puanui project, and also Lucy, who's been supporting us on that, because they've been integrally involved in that, and they're the experts. I think I will just jump in and answer this if you want to, guys. But I think that the nature of a regeneration project, and a regeneration project which is as complex as, looking at all the systems and the different outcomes and benefits with waterways, it necessitates a different way of working, and BAU doesn't work. And I think that's one of the things which was highlighted really early on in our flagship discussion, was that on the face of it, when you look at something like this, it makes so much sense, but then when you start digging into all the complexities of it, it necessitates, you need systems thinking, you need to work in a way that acknowledges all those complexities. And I think one of the questions we've got that we're going to be addressing the next couple of days is around governance. And so what kind of governance structures do you need which is going to support that? And I think it's, I think as, a lot of the discussions around climate and how we respond to that, it does necessitate a different way of thinking and a different way of making investment decisions and a different way of valuing stuff and looking over the longer term and standing back and being more collaborative and removing ourselves from our default way of thinking and valuing stuff. And I think, that's certainly my understanding, that's very in keeping with Te Ao Māori. So, sure.
Did your colleagues have anything they wanted to add to that?
Do you want to add anything?
I'm thinking about the Manukau Transformation Project. Having mana whenua at the table has been able to allow mana whenua to facilitate another way of doing it. So it's not just about being restricted to this Manukau Transform box. And so the Puhunui was recognised as a natural body that traversed actually through the Manukau Transform project. And so what for mana whenua was how can we uplift the motive of the Puhunui, the fact that she the puna is up in the Botanic Gardens and goes right down into the Manukau Harbour, so it's about the whole system. And from a Mātauranga Māori perspective, nothing's separated.
And I just wanted to assure people here that we have had mana whenua at the table from the very outset, and our first step on that particular project was to establish a co-partnership with across council and with mana whenua and local board there, so recognising comments that everyone said around the complexity around collaboration and having to get those structures right from the very outset of the project. But our first step with the Puhunui will be to deeply understand the cultural values and stories of that place. So that's a piece of work that we're moving into now. So before we even start dreaming up the pieces of infrastructure, we're going to ask the people that know best what we need to know about this place and this natural system.
Kia ora, thank you. We do need to wrap up this session now, and so thanks for your questions. And before we thank the panellists, David and I just wanted to make a few closing comments, I guess. And I just wanted to pick up on what Miranda was just talking about, and others have been talking about the need for different ways of thinking. One of the things I've been reflecting on as I've just been sitting there listening today, which has been fantastic, is really the disconnect between what we know we need to do and some of the things that we're hearing being proposed as actions, throughout the day. And a lot of that being really, at least as in the way I see it, as incremental change, rather than what we really need, which is disruptive, radical, transformative change. Even if we look at the IPCC report, which even that has been superseded, and now we're talking about zero carbon or zero emissions by 2050 as being totally inadequate. That, essentially that, if you think about that from the perspective of our Pacific neighbours, is genocidal. That's the way they're describing it. So we need to think radically differently, and just to, I think, move us away from the standard BAU, I think it was termed, to actually think about how we not just incorporate different perspectives. I've heard about, incorporating Indigenous or Māori perspectives, but actually that idea of partnership and governance and truly investing in mātauranga Māori, Māori ways of doing things to try and get that different way of thinking and different way of acting. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora. My profession is political philosophy, and I focus on policy issues, but the two issues are climate change policy but also migration policy. So I feel like I should have something to say about this, given the events last week, where, the morning was this amazing sort of forward-looking thing on climate change, and then the afternoon was a appalling terror event. But there is a common theme here. I mean, I study both of these, and I think, one of the key problems here really, and what we have to overpower and overcome is a worldview which has been around for a long time, that humankind, or sometimes mankind, is separate from nature and superior to nature. And that it's, there has been for far too long this sort of treatment of nature as a resource that we can exploit and consume constantly. And the social side of that, which really crystallized in the 16th century, especially during the industrialization of agriculture and food production, was bringing people into that conception of nature as separate and inferior, and also treating them as a resource to exploit through slavery and then through colonialism. And there is this common theme of treating nature and people as cheap resources that we can exploit. And while there has been improvements, the abolition of slavery, an awakening around some of the issues around colonialism, migration policy is still an area where this plays out. Migrants are often treated as a resource to use. Some of those migrants who died last week would have been here on a 2-year visa, which was introduced in 2017 with the express purpose of making sure that they don't become part of the community that they have to leave after 2 years. Migration policy treats people in this way, and this manifests. And another improvement has been the environmental movement, but again, we're still treating the sky like a landfill and the Waitemata like a toilet. There's a huge amount of work to be done. I think the idea of the Anthropocene is kind of a recognition that human action is, that divide between humankind and nature is no longer tangible because, our impacts are so widespread, but that still sort of retains this distinction between humans and nature, and it fails to recognize that not everybody has had that worldview of separating humans from nature. If you think in Te Ao Māori, you think in terms of whakapapa and your relationship to the land and to other people. And actually, all through European thought, there's also traditions like this. Being a philosopher, I could wax on lyrically about the early Scottish Enlightenment and Hume and Smith and German holistic tradition, American pragmatism, the feminist, many strains of feminist thinking, and so on and so forth. And recently as well, this sort of resurgence of ecological thinking and systems thinking and integrated systems thinking. I think, these are the ways that we need to think that we're related to the nature. We've transformed nature ever since humans have been humans, and we've been transformed by nature as well. And you know, we are connected to people in the past and connected to people in the future as well, which is an idea which exists in Te Ao Māori and also the English conservative tradition through Edmund Burke. But these ideas are out there, and these are the sorts of ways of thinking which I think can help us both in overcoming the horror of last week, but also the way forward for supporting the students in their school strike, which we need to do despite their message being derailed. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So we started off with flagship actions, and look where we ended up. That's what happens when you invite pointy-headed academics like us to chair. It just remains for me to thank all our panellists. So homai te paki paki. And I'm now going to pass back to Rod. Kia ora tātou.
By all means. I'm just slightly rearranging the furniture to make this a safer space for me than Penny. Look, this is by no means any kind of attempt to summarize, synthesize, or otherwise, gosh, that had a nice ring to it, or otherwise wrap up a very rich and multifaceted day. But I just wanted to reflect, if I may, on a few things that certainly have come through for me, and I'm sure in other ways for other people. The first one is that, of course, the city is by its people, for its people, and so people is at the heart of what we're trying to do here in Tamaki Makaurau. But we started this morning, I think, in a very different context of understanding what that means about people, because of the massacre, I have to use that word, in Otatahi on Friday noon last week. And Otene just beautifully held that space for us while we grieved and considered that. Because we are here in Tamaki Makaurau in a more extreme way than the rest of the country, the country fits this too. We are a microcosm of the world in terms of the people who have chosen to come here, whether they chose to come here 1,000 years ago or 1,000 days ago, or even more recently. And in that, we have this tremendous opportunity to give our own expression to that, as to who we are as the people of this city, through how we imagine and create and live this city. So that's the first imperative, if you like, for us as we consider how we take Auckland forward. Because this is about climate change, but everything that happens to solve that serves a far bigger purpose. I mean, survival is a big purpose, but there's a huge richness that drives all these other things there. So we were urged to do that work by the Prime Minister, who is obviously thinking about these things from a whole of nation point of view, with the likes of the wellbeing budget and zero carbon action coming. So that was a New Zealand context. And then we heard the international context, the importance of cities, and the work that C40 is doing. As I said earlier, it's far more than 40 cities now. And Auckland's really well engaged in that. It was a terrific week last year that I had a chance to be slightly involved with, where Auckland actually convenes the waste stream work of C40s, which is a remarkable thing for us to do, partly because in some ways we're behind other cities, long way behind other cities. But it was really wonderful to see people from that work stream from around the world come and work, I think, slightly differently and better. Certainly some of them expressed that to me because of the nature of who we are as a people and how we come together. So I think we have a distinctive role to play, a useful role to play in helping making our contributions to these issues globally. So that was session 1. Session 2 was an overview about the climate action plan itself and about that enormous challenge of trying to ultimately achieving very deep and true sustainability in all senses of that word. And so rightly, a terrific input from Mana Whenua Kateaki Forum and Rangatahi there. And then going straight into the hard numbers, the hard science of this, offered by Joan from Arup, about the huge decarbonisation challenge that can only ever be accomplished if we radically change kind of like everything we do. A phrase I use all the time is that we've got to learn how to work with nature, not against it. Is kind of the simplest way of trying to describe what that might be. And from Kara, that huge sense of urgency there about the health of people and the health of place. And then lastly in the morning, Boyd and all his work is hugely important around obesity. But he stepped you through this incredibly important work from the EAT Lancet Commission, EAT, the EAT Forum being a Scandinavian NGO, and Lancet, of course, being the British Medical Journal. And these twin goals of arriving at healthy people and healthy planet. So healthy because of a change in what we eat, and a healthy planet because of the change in the way we grow food and do agriculture, because in aggregate, agriculture globally is the greatest driver of climate change. Here in New Zealand, we wash 200 million tonnes of topsoil off our land and down our rivers and into our estuaries and out to sea every year. So these are enormous challenges. I would urge you to have a read. It's immensely readable if you go to the EAT Forum website or indeed to look at the material on the Commission's report just out about 5 or 6 weeks ago. Or you could go to Newsroom and just search on Rod and the word Lancet, and you'll find a piece there about that. But hugely fundamental. So then we came back after lunch, our vegan lunch, so big thumbs up to Kokako for their work there. Session 3 about just transitions, powerfully framed by Alana about equity and access, which is a fundamental human right, but it's essential, of course, also towards building that sense of engagement and empowerment by which people will want to contribute their energy, their ideas for these huge transformations. And then that wonderful video from Todd of the World Resources Institute about blue-green networks, and then we're moving on to our session on land use and transportation there, about how we are rebuilding the city as we can as we go, whilst building anew to fundamentally shape the way we do urban New Zealand. And then this last session about the 5 flagship actions there about decentralized renewable energy, a zero carbon city centre. I love that goal of having the best air quality in a city over 1 million people. Surely that should be fairly straightforward when we're surrounded by so much ocean. So I'm not minimizing the effort required there. And the blue-green networks, wonderfully being worked on there down in the Manukau harbour and its surrounding hinterland, climate innovation and how we can drive those systematic innovation much better. And then, very importantly, that circular construction and demolition concepts there, because the circular economy is fundamentally important in this. Otherwise, it just doesn't work in resource terms. One of many memorable phrases there was from Miranda about daylighting mines before you daylight streams, which had a particular resonance to me. So that is just some of my personal highlights of the day. And I just want to thank you all hugely for being here and contributing to it. I know that the conversations, your reflections and your input will significantly help take the climate action plan on. So thank you for that. And a lot of thanks to all the hard work that's gone into organising this, and for all the people who have contributed as speakers in other ways. Next, Penny's going to come back for her reflections, and then this isn't quite the last word for me, because after Penny's finished, I've got some rather particular housekeeping instructions to move you on to the next thing after this. So don't immediately leap up after. Well, you could leap up to give her a big round of applause, but don't quite exit the room. A very big hand for Penny, please. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora. It's been a great day, but it's been a long one. So, first of all, Rod, thank you for that exceedingly clear, articulate, and as always, fulfilling roundup of the huge kōrero that's happened today. I was particularly taken by Professor Ian White saying, well, if we're all agreed, what's stopping us? And I think that for me feels like the absolute takeout. Our rangatahi have told us to get on with it. Abby Reynolds has said that business is ready. You know, they're basically ahead of us. And as James Shaw said, business is ahead of us. We need to catch up. Kira Sherwood basically challenges us to deal with the impacts of climate change, because we know that it's an inequity magnifier, which I think is an extraordinary way of putting it. There's no excuse for us to slow down, and our panels this afternoon, I think, pointed out quite clearly the work that needs to be done. But it really struck home as we listened to the land use, transport planning debate, which is such a well-worn discussion and debate, that's where the worlds collide. And that's where the world of what we should do and what we know we have to do collides with the world of what we are going to do. I'm allowed to say this because I'm a politician. Politics is where it stops. It hits the great big ballistics jelly, you know, those things that you fire bullets into and they just stop dead. That is exactly where good ideas stop. And my challenge sitting there today is, we know what to do. This is bringing a good bunch of people together to actually change the world and to remove those stoppages. And to be absolutely blunt, I do have a solution. We actually need to make this political now. We've done all the thinking, and I do need to apologise to the pointy heads in the room, and I need to explain why. It's our family's way of reclaiming the pointy head discussion. It's not ever said in anything but with love. I am married to a pointy head. So it is the way that our family talk about, you're either a beardy weirdy or a pointy head. You're either an academic or a scientist. My sons are academics, my husband's a scientist. So I did need to explain that, lest anyone said I should not be speaking in love. But the beardy weirdies and the pointy heads have done the work. It's now up to us politicians to make the difference. And my challenge is, and I thought it was beautifully put, that we can count things where the power of numbers is overpowering the power of value, and that's where it stops. The business case for a road is often going to outweigh the business case for bus lanes, because we simply count the wrong things and we do the maths wrong, and we're leaving out the social impacts, we're leaving out the impacts of carbonising the air, we're leaving out the impacts of destroying the environment, and I think as someone beautifully said, we're turning our sky into a landfill and our seas into a toilet, and we are not accounting for any of those impacts, and we're leaving them out of the debate. So, what's the solution? We've got our action plan. That's where we're going to see this in front of anybody. Our climate change action plan is the place where we're actually going to see what the jobs are that we need to do. To bring them to life, however, we need to make sure that in the election, which is coming upon us in October, that we interrogate our politicians. We ask them what they think of the climate change action plan. We ask them how they're going to enact what is required to simply change the future of our earth. We don't ask them whether they're going to put the rates up or not. And I want this debate to drown out the rates debate, because it's people like Pippa who we need around the council table. It's people like Chris Darby and Richard Hills who we need around the council table. And we do not need these people to be chased out by the keep the rates at 2.5%, don't change anything, because without that, I'm sorry, but none of this will change. If that's unnecessarily political, I make no apology for that, because otherwise this remains all talk and no action. So to finish up, I'd like to thank most warmly our independent panel, our fantastic bunch who told us what the next steps are going to be and what our flagship projects are going to be. And I think that's going to be an incredibly exciting time to see theory made real. I want to extend my aroha to our team who work with John Morrow in our sustainability Change the World team. You are extraordinary, and without you, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you for everything that you do. It's actually our Chief Sustainability Officer and his team, which is probably not quite the Change the World team, but it's how I like to think of them. I want to thank Rod Oram, as always. You challenge us, Rod, you inspire us, but most of all, you're our friend, and you speak truth to power when it's needed, but you also take the discussion to where it needs to go, and for that we appreciate you most deeply. Finally, to all of you who've stayed the course, who've been here, thank you. Thank you for your input and your ideas. I hope that we do take this to the streets, that we take this to politics, that we take this to maybe inspire some of you to stand and to join us at that council table or the government table where the decisions get made that either move the dial along or stop it dead in its tracks. So kia ora and thank you. And I'd like to invite the wonderful Dr. Rhys-Jones to close us in karakia and then hand over to you, Rod, or would you like to speak before we have the karakia? Well, just check the protocol. Why don't I hand over to Rod, knowing my place in things, which is always to hand back to the MC, and Rod will take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you. My one piece of housekeeping is this. There is a wonderful event down those stairs back there and down the lobby area where you came in. It's about Future Fit, a wonderful new carbon footprint calculator. That's only one attraction. It's going to be launched by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Simon Upton, who is a very impressive person to come and talk to. There is food, there is drink, and there's a very special piece of entertainment. If none of that appeals to you, or you have really strong will to resist it, please could you exit out this way and go to the lifts and go out that way, because if you try and get out that way, you'll be caught up in everything else. So that was the one piece of housekeeping. If you want a quick exit, go in the lift. If you want an exhilarating half an hour, go down that way. Hey, it's your choice. That's all I've got to say, and appropriately I hand over to Rhys. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. Thanks, Rod. And I'm going to be very brief. As Penny said, it's been a long day. But I did just want to, I guess firstly acknowledge everyone who's helped put this together. I think it's been a fantastic day. But really also to acknowledge, really importantly, mana whenua, Otene on behalf of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, who started our day off. And I think with his karakia, really, I don't know, reimagined our national anthem in a way that resonated hugely, I think, with how a lot of us were feeling. And I know I personally was struggling with how am I going to actually come and deal with this today after the events of Friday, after the horrific attack, and how I'd been feeling all weekend, and I know many others would have too. But I think that helped transition us into a really good place. And I also just want to send my aroha to our Muslim brothers and sisters, and I hope that we can all stand in solidarity, at least from this point on, with our Muslim communities, do everything we can to dismantle the systems that help to create the conditions for that type of atrocity. So a bit of a challenge out to all of us to stand up where we can against racism, bigotry, wherever we see it. Sorry to go there, but we do need to now close off our session. So really, I just wanted to say a very brief karakia, just to kia whakakapi I tēnei wāhanga, kia tika te haere whakamua. So to just close off this part of the session and to hopefully set us on the right path going forward. Nō reira, kia noi tātou. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te mea ngaro ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahi a te hua mā kihiki, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te taiao, toi te reo Māori, kia tūturu ka whakamua, kia tīna, haumie, huie, tae ki e. Kia ora tātou.